Welcome to High Stakes Criminal Defense Podcast.
Welcome to the High Stakes Criminal Defense Podcast with experienced attorney Jeremy Babich at Levine, Flier, and Flier in California. When freedom, reputation, and a lifetime of hard work are on the line, the person you choose to stand beside you in court is the most important decision you will ever make. Jeremy is a zealous advocate who specializes in high-exposure litigation, from complex white-collar offenses to serious felony charges like murder and sex crimes. Jeremy is known for his trial-ready strategy and his ability to navigate the most daunting legal battles. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today, Jeremy joins us to pull back the curtain on what it truly takes to defend a high-profile case when the stakes couldn't be higher. Hello again, Jeremy.
Hi, how are you?
So good to be here again. Jeremy, when a high net worth individual or professional is first charged with a serious felony, what are the first 24 to 48 hours of your strategy like?
The first 24 to 48 hours of my strategy, once we are brought in, because that is crucial, is the defendant or the client bringing in an attorney almost immediately to make sure that his rights aren't violated and to make sure that they aren't coerced into giving a statement that is ultimately not the truth and twisted by the law enforcement. So my 24 to 48 hours are in terms of risk management, bringing in an investigator if need be, and also making sure that the team is set to go and we know all the facts or as many of the facts, speak with my client, make sure he knows not to speak to anyone, and take it step by step as the justice system develops in the process and make sure that everything is followed accordingly. But the first 24 to 48 hours can be crucial to make sure that the client doesn't do something that ultimately could be the nail in the coffin.
So, how does defending a high exposure case differ from a standard criminal matter?
That is a very interesting question. And until I fully got immersed in this and learned it myself, it's not like it is portrayed on television or everything. But it is very important to understand that being in a public case is different. It is different in many facets, but one of the key facets is when selecting a jury. A lot of the times in high profile cases, the jury is aware of the case in hand. And unlike in regular cases, most jurors have never heard of it and have no idea who the defendant may even be. So that is where it is so crucial to make sure you are selecting a jury that is unbiased, that doesn't have previous exposure to the case, that hasn't already convicted your client as guilty without even hearing the facts of the case, without even understanding what the reality is and why they are in the situation. Because unfortunately, so many people in our society are glued to media, are glued to headlines, and do immediately reach a decision and make that determination prior to hearing the entire story in both sides of the case.
So, what is the biggest misconception people have about how high profile defense actually works behind the closed doors?
I mean, I'm sure many people have the or preconceived notion that all high stakes cases are just solved with money. Buying the best legal defense team, fancy lawyers, all of these things, investigators to make it seem that money just buys a person's innocence. And that is just not simply the case. Yes, money does go a long way. I'm not ignorant to that fact in terms of getting the proper investigation done, proper resources, and everything, but that does not ultimately determine that a case is dealt with and how a case is dealt with where a defendant is found to be not guilty merely because they have a bunch of money. However, in addition to that, what is a very common misconception is that the prosecutor and the defense attorney are just doing this for the media attention. That is not true. We never do it for that. Media is something that we are very proud of, and the fact that based on our constitution, the media does get a right to sit in trials, especially when there is a big media presence. And we also want to make sure that the media lets us and the system do its job the correct way and doesn't poison the jury pool and doesn't make it seem that the client is starting off 100 feet instead of being presumed innocent, they're presumed guilty based on the media.
So, when the stakes are life in prison or a ruined reputation, how do you manage the immense pressure placed on the defense team?
Honestly, it comes and goes. The pressure is something that we deal with. Pressure is something that I feel even more so when I know my client is innocent, because that's where the pressure is at its highest for me to make sure. However, that's not merely what I feel, because in life in prison cases where someone's life is in jeopardy, it's up to me as their zealous advocate to make sure that they aren't unjustly punished. And also, this is a person who had very well might have a family, very well might have kids, very well might have a bunch of people who rely on them. And it's my job to show the prosecutor that even if they are potentially guilty of this mistake, depending on what the charge might be, that doesn't mean that they are someone who deserves to spend the rest of their life in prison. Prison isn't something that we should just utilize to just merely throw people in, have the taxpayers pay for it, and let them rot the rest of their life in prison if they are someone who has the ability to rehabilitate, who has the ability to learn from their mistakes and then become a productive member of society, and make sure that families aren't destroyed and ruined unnecessarily. And that's my job, and that's where I come in to be that zealous advocate for them when they don't have the ability to speak and advocate for themselves in so many instances.
In complex cases like white collar crime or serious felonies, how early do you bring in private investigators or forensic experts?
So that's actually very interesting, because sometimes we are brought into a case ultimately a little too late, where we are substituting in as the new attorney of record. And unfortunately, the prior attorney in some instances did not do the proper investigation. And unfortunately, certain evidence is gone, whether that's phone records, where cell phone companies override certain records and don't keep him for an indefinite period of time, or surveillance footage, which could have been attained within the first 2 weeks or the first month, that is no longer there. And unfortunately, that is why when we are involved from the get go, we try to get an investigator on board within the first 24 to 48 hours. One, to interview certain witnesses as well, because that's when the memory is the freshest. You want to get to people to give their statements on record at the earliest possible time, because you want to make sure you get that statement on record before memories fade, before certain facts start changing in their mind, before someone else might get to them and convince them of something else. So that is why, in my opinion, it's very important in very serious cases, felony cases, to get an investigator on board within a very short period of time.
So, how do you handle the court of public opinion when a client's reputation is being attacked in the media before the trial even begins?
That kind of falls back to the first question we kind of touched on, where it is my job in many cases to speak for on the client's behalf, whether it's talking to the media or giving a statement, to make sure that the justice system is able to do its job and able to do it fairly. Because I don't want, my number one job is to make sure the public at large isn't just dealing with a perceived notion that our client or my client is just guilty and isn't saying anything about it, that the only things that are being voiced in public media are just negative statements about it. So my job is to make sure that, first off, that the public is aware that he did plead not guilty, if that is the case, that he believes zealously in his own innocence and is adamant about his innocence, and that it is my job to let the trial and the court system and this judicial process play out as it should, to ultimately reach the just conclusion. Because in my opinion, most of the time the jurors and the jury in this system of ours get it right. There are obviously exceptions to that, but I ultimately am a big proponent of the system and truly do believe that it is the best system we could possibly have, and that the presumption of innocence is something that is so crucial in a criminal case, to not place the burden on the defense to prove their innocence, but rather place that burden on the prosecution to prove the defendant's guilt if it is applicable. And if not, to not let public media sway that and have the defendant start off on the wrong foot when the trial starts.
When we introduced you today, Jeremy, we talked about you being a trial ready attorney. What does it mean to be a trial ready attorney? And Why should a defendant care if their lawyer actually goes to trial?
Trial experience is something that is extremely valuable. In my opinion, it's the most valuable thing when you're hiring an attorney, especially one where you are expecting to go to trial. Trial experience is something that I've gained since I was 23 years old. I became a lawyer and I've been practicing since. And in every single case of trial, you learn something new and you continue to learn, you continue to see what works, what doesn't work, get a better sense of how to pick jurors when you're picking a jury. It's such a gut feeling at times, but there is no science to it except experience. That's the way to go about it. And as most people know, practice makes perfect. So being trial ready is someone who has that experience, who has been in a courtroom cross-examining witnesses, who's had to think on his feet or her feet when it placed in uncomfortable situations that they weren't expecting, or they got an answer that they didn't expect, and able to adapt and change your position, or able to really connect to a jury and really see that, and ultimately the jury wants a reason to vote for your client's innocence, and it's up to you to give them that reason. So being that trial ready attorney is so crucial for someone who is seeking the possibility, especially in serious cases, of life in prison or even a very long time in prison. And it's up to you to make sure that you get someone who is trial ready, because ultimately that could make or break the verdict.
So, in high stakes cases, how do you navigate the relationship with the prosecutors who may also be under pressure to secure a conviction?
What is important to me, especially when dealing with prosecutors, and I've experienced this from both sides of it, is ultimate professionalism in this environment. Trial is stressful. Trial is very, very serious. And it's up to me to maintain that professional decorum, which I truly am trying to exemplify every time I step into a courtroom, not only to make sure the jurors see that and don't ultimately prejudice my client if I'm acting disorderly in the courtroom, or making a fool out of myself, or acting with a little disrespect. So ultimately, I truly value professionalism in the courtroom and decorum. And I treat this as a job. It is a job ultimately. I'm the same way it's a job for the prosecutor. We both want to win, but we both want to be zealous advocates for the facts. And sometimes it is up to me to show, when I am dealing with a prosecutor, that it isn't personal, that this isn't about you or me. It's about the facts. And ultimately, it's about my client's life in many instances. So, whether or not the prosecutor is representing the state or I'm representing a specific person, it is ultimately important to do it in a professional way and in a way that both sides do it respectfully.
As we wrap up for today, Jeremy, and after years of being, as we said, a zealous advocate, what is the most rewarding part of defending someone when the world seems to have already turned against them?
It's unfortunate. It is dark at times, and my job is not easy, and it's not for everyone. But what is rewarding for me is ultimately being that, in so many cases, the last hope for so many people, and reassuring them and being that comfort for them, and that one thing that they can continue to hang on and continue to believe in, even when the world has turned against them and they are in their lowest of lows, to make sure that they aren't stuck there, to try to pull them out little by little, whether it's meeting with them frequently, whether it's talking through it with them, whether it's giving them the reality of the situation, because I'm not here to sugarcoat things for them either. I have to be a zealous advocate, but I also have to be a realistic one, and I have to show them, which I try to do and I tend to do, all the realistic options that they have, and make sure they don't end up making a decision that is ultimately going to be one they regret. And that is my job, is to advocate to them and give them my legal counsel, which I will always do. But also, it's rewarding because in so many instances, I do end up getting their life back, or giving them that second chance, or giving them the ability to, you know what, learn from their mistakes, or move forward and better themselves. And then they develop into someone who has the communal outreach that stops other people from making these mistakes. So ultimately, that's what's rewarding, is the fact that I get to make a difference. And I will continue to fall back on that, whether or not people have the presumption that my client is guilty or innocent. It is my job to make sure that their rights are not infringed upon, and they get the fairness and the just judicial process that they so deserve.
Well, that is it for today's episode. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Criminal Defense Podcast. When your future is on the line, the right information is your best defense. If you or a loved one is facing serious allegations in California, visit Levine, Flier, and Flier.com to learn more about Jeremy Babich and his strategic approach to criminal defense. If you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment so you catch every episode. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.